Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast. And man, Spencer Holbrook, my trusted co-pilot, we finally have a game to talk about for the 2022 Ohio State Buckeyes. And not just any rummy dummy warm-up game. This was against number 5, Notre Dame. Ohio State wins 21-10. As we project forward, I think we saw a lot of things in that game which bode well for this team. Some concern to a certain extent, but you know what? When you really boil it down, 21-10 was a fitting score for that game, and some of the challenges the Ohio State offense faced in that game, both from an alignment standpoint defensively by Notre Dame to some personnel situations they had to scramble and fill in for. But number one, what's your take, and will it be fair off of this game, because we're recording this Truth in Advertising on Monday afternoon. The polls will come out on Tuesday because of the late finishing nature of this Labor Day weekend for major college football. Will it be fair if the Buckeyes indeed drop to number 3 like most people project in that first regular season poll? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that, you touched on a little bit of concern. I think we'll get into it later, but I don't have any concern heading out of this game. I think the offense is going to fix itself. It's not, it's not one of these things where there'll be lingering offensive issues all year. CJ Stroud and company will get it figured out. Now, that being said, as impressive as Georgia was on Saturday, I guess, against an Oregon team that was outgunned and outmanned, and Kirby Smart even said they've got better players than Oregon.
I thought you were going to say they were outsmarted. Go ahead.
No, I could have said that, I guess, but it won't surprise me at all if Ohio State drops to number 3. And, to be honest, Tim, I don't think anybody inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, nor anybody on this podcast, really cares about the poll in week 2.
Yeah, but let me interrupt you. Some people are going to be saying, Oregon went to Ohio State last year, early in the year, and beat Ohio State, blah, blah, blah. And look what Georgia did to Oregon this year. But as Ryan Day has pointed out, and as we saw firsthand on Saturday night in the horseshoe, the jam-packed, frenzied horseshoe, otherwise known as the shoe, a team can be so much different from one year to the next, right? And a lot of people don't take that into account, especially early in a college football season. They're living off of memories as much as they are what's right in front of them, correct?
Yeah. And if Ohio State played a Bo Nix-led offense last year, I think Ohio State would have beat them by 4 touchdowns, even with a bad defense. I mean, So wow. You take it all for what it's worth, but maybe Georgia jumps Ohio State, maybe something crazy like that'll happen, but I don't think it really matters right now. Ohio State's focused on Arkansas State, and you've got 2 weeks to kind of get things corrected before Wisconsin comes to town. And if this run defense keeps it up, Tim, I don't even know how much of a challenge Wisconsin will be for this defense to face, just because if they can stuff the run against the Notre Dame offensive line, I think they'll be able to do it against Wisconsin.
Yeah, it's funny how you say that, because Wisconsin used to be the where you measured a lot of offensive lines from the standpoint of the running game, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, they suppose they've gotten better than they were a year ago. We'll see if in fact, but that's down the road. I've got a special guest this week, Matt Wilhelm, an encore performance, but about his 4th or 5th encore on the Tim May podcast, and we get into not just the 2002 National Championship team's reunion this past Saturday in Ohio Stadium, but also the defense, because nobody breaks it down better than him, in my opinion. I always enjoy talking football with Matt because, number one, he's not bashful about talking about it. And then number 2, he knows what he's talking about. I mean, the guy won a national championship, won a Super Bowl, played in the NFL for a while. Now he's raising a family up in the Cleveland area and getting things done. But I wanted to ask you this real quick before we move to that. Coming out of this opener, the one major concern that I think a lot of people had, and as you and I talked about yesterday on our little Monday look forward piece for lettermenrow.com, from a video standpoint, Jackson Smith-Njigba is apparently dealing with a hamstring pull or a hamstring strain of some sort. That's why he tried to show his wares there on the sideline after he was taken out, went back into the game for a little while. Then they pulled him out more as a precautionary thing than anything else. And you know how hamstrings can go. Jordan Hancock is still really kind of coming back from what sidelined him back in the preseason, but all hamstring injuries are not the same. So that'll be something to watch. But the fact that they play the next 2 weeks, Arkansas State and Toledo, I think gives him a little bit of time to get healed up, right?
Yeah, and I don't think there's any rush to get him back when you talk about the two opponents that are coming up. You can look at what Arkansas State just did. You can look at what Arkansas State did on offense this past week and throw it out the window because they played a terrible FCS school, and I still don't trust what Butch Jones can do against Ohio State. And then you look at Toledo, who has a good program in the MAC, but they're in the MAC for a reason. And so, to rush Jackson Smith and Jigba back right now, for any reason in the next 2 weeks would be kind of I think silly for Ohio State. If he's healthy, absolutely play.
Yeah.
If you're healthy, play.
Sure.
But if you're even considering, taking precautions when it comes to the next 2 weeks before the stretch that is late September, early October, there's no reason whatsoever to have him suit up and risk further damaging that and having him out for, a long period of the season when you might need him in October. So
yeah.
It's one of those things where you want to take all the precautions in the world. And right now you have the ability to take precautions because of the schedule that's in front of you.
Yeah. And we'll get into this. We got into this a little bit yesterday. Well, I got into a lot yesterday. Is we were standing there talking about the game and what's to come. I mean, I really enjoy doing those Monday pieces. I didn't get to do that much in the old regime, but, maybe people get tired of hearing my voice, but I enjoy talking about football. And boy, Ohio State just not really plumbing the depths. I mean, Xavier Johnson was ready to play. You know what I mean? When he was thrown in there the other night, a guy was a walk-on in his fifth year or whatever it is now, from the walk-on in 2018. He finally got his shot to show what he was all about in prime time. And he definitely got the job done, playing basically in place of Jackson Smith and Jigba. So it's just interesting. We talked about that Brian Hartline wide receiver room, but boy, did it come to fruition. And basically from someone who woke up on Saturday probably not thinking he was going to be as big a factor in that game as he ended up being. And definitely the fans were all scrambling, I'm sure, to renew themselves on who is Xavier Johnson. But that's the joy kind of covering this team right now. And it's kind of loaded with talent.
Yeah. And you said it best yourself. Another guy that I think didn't probably see himself being on the field much is Jaden Ballard, who ended up having 2 catches. One of them went for a first down. One of them, helped the Buckeyes get out of a 2nd and 10. And so it's not just Xavier Johnson on the touchdown catch. It was, Jaden Ballard. It was Matt Wilhelm. We thought waking up Saturday morning we were going to be talking about now C.J. Stroud, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Travion Henderson. And instead we're talking about Mayan Williams, Mike Hall, and Xavier Johnson. And so you never know.
Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but this wasn't against a rummy dummy. This was against a number 5 team in the country, Notre Dame, where they got the job done. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and that just goes to show you the depth of talent that Ohio State has on this roster. You think you've got the superstars held down, and all of a sudden another platoon of guys comes storming in and is able to get the job done. So it's a testament to what they've built, especially on that offensive side, and what they're building on defense right now. But I'm sure we'll get into the defense more after Matt Wilhelm speaks.
You got it, man. That one guy who's always criticizing me for interrupting people, I'm sure he's already posted his comment now. I don't read those comments except occasionally and whatever. I mean, it's my podcast. I'll interrupt all I want. You know what I mean? But with Matt Wilhelm, there's no reason to interrupt. It's hard to interrupt because he's the Tim May of his portion of the podcast when he's on. Spence, let's listen to former Ohio State linebacker, part of the 2002 national championship team, a guy who helped me break down what was wrong with the defense last year on multiple occasions on my podcast. And then in the build up to the Jim Knowles debut, who was on my podcast several times, talking about what he likes about Knowles, et cetera. And now to have finally seen it live in person and to see them shut out Notre Dame in the second half of a 21-10 win by Ohio State. Let's get to the comments from Matt Wilhelm. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, as I promised, an encore appearance by Matt Wilhelm. This is about your 4th or 5th encore, isn't it, Matt? But welcome back to the Tim May podcast, my man.
Always, every time I get your text, if I have the schedule, I'm going to make it on because again, we can talk ball for hours, but especially after a big Buckeye win like we had on Saturday, it's great to join you.
And you know why I've got you on, man, because I had you giving some feelers about what you think the Jim Knowles defense was going to look like. We had you giving feelers about where they needed to change things during the year last year, right after the year last year, et cetera. We're going to get to that in a minute. And I would think you were fairly pleased by what you saw. But let's get first, man. You were in the stadium on Saturday. You're wearing that shirt. I would think that's a limited edition shirt right there. And the 2002 national championship team had its 20th year reunion. That's how old you're getting, Matt.
Yeah, talk about how old
I'm getting. But what was it like to be back in the stadium? Obviously, you've been back many times since, but what was it back being there with your group, enjoying that the accolades once again?
It was amazing, and Mike Doss and some other folks actually arranged a private event on Friday at the Land Grant Brewery, which was fantastic. Where most guys came in a relaxed setting, having some great barbecue, and having a couple of beers in front of a couple thousand fans that actually paid to come reminisce, who we were and what we accomplished in that 2002 season. So that was great, and then there was a brunch, there was a tailgate, and the recognition at halftime, and it's wild. The guys that you stay in touch with are the ones that you feel like you're the closest with. But then it's just when you get to these reunions, and again, you talked just before we jumped on. We don't go to high school reunions, and I've never been to one either. But it's just like you start to see these faces, and my wife asked me like, who changed the most, and I go, you know what? Everyone just kind of looks like a 20-year-old older version of the same kid that they were when we were 21, right?
Yeah.
But it was great, and I think what was cool for me was to have my wife there. She was there at the 10-year. Again, we got honored at the halftime of the Michigan game. But 10 years removed, I now have at that time I had a 4-year-old son who couldn't care less of who I was or what I accomplished, whether it's Ohio State or NFL. Well, now he's 14. He's a football player. He's a freshman in high school playing, up here at St. Edward High School. And to have him come and meet the guys and meet Coach Tress and meet Maurice Claret and meet some of the guys, and then be in the stadium, watch us, walk out at halftime and have, Coach Tressel, now we have the best damn team in the land, and have 106,000 people appreciate you. I got, I didn't get teary. I didn't get emotional about all that stuff. But I think the one thing that was wild for me, though, was, and I know a lot has changed in 20 years with the fireworks and the turf and the suites and PSLs on tickets and so on. It's like, I was like, and I had to say this to my son walking out of the game after a victory. I go, dude, it is wild for me to still think that, like, I played on that field 6 to 7 times a season for 4 seasons in a row.
Yeah.
And did what I did. So the same way, and again, and we'll get into them when we get into defense, but like having Tommy Eichenberg wearing 35, being a Northeast Ohio kid. And we talked about him last year, and he got off to a good start, and as a starter last year. But I think in this Jim Knowles defense and what he did, to see 35 making plays, 2 sacks, 3 TFLs, it was like, I was that dude. And it was just, it's wild to think. But then being said, 20 years goes by fast. But then again, I go, okay, I have 3 kids. I've been married for 15 years. I've been, with my wife for 18. And it's like, I've played in the NFL for 8 years. I've won a Super Bowl. It's like a lot has happened in 20 years. So then again, to your point, it does make you start to feel old.
Hey, give me 2 quickies before we move into the defense thing, because people like the way you sum up this defense one way or the other. That's a tease. Who were you just most? Obviously we know, as you pointed out to me before we started here, Chris Gamble did not show up. In my opinion, and even in Jim Tressel's opinion, they probably don't get to where you guys probably don't get to where you got without the multi-talented Chris Gamble filling in. He was kind of like caulking windows there, man, filling in exactly the gaps where y'all needed them exactly, offense and defense. I'm sure. Well, I'll ask you the next question in a second. I'm sure you were disappointed maybe to see him not show up, weren't you?
A little bit, yes. And having the opportunity, at that land grant event to, sit with Coach Tress. And of course, Dawson and I sat together on stage, and we were together a lot over the course of the weekend. And just the effort that they made to get Chris there. And for whatever reason, I don't know whether he felt like, getting on a plane, flying into Columbus, finding a place to stay, and just because here's the thing, when Chris as a person, as we all did, it was like, he was super low key, very mild, didn't talk a lot, wasn't filled with ego in any way, shape, or form. So acknowledgement for him was kind of like, I don't want the spotlight. And it's almost like what came with that season. It was, I'm playing receiver, I'm needed on defense. I just went out and did my job, and just was, in many cases, unless it was even the national championship game, the best athlete on the field. Game after game after game after game. And you can even see his celebrations. It was just they're very subdued. He just jogged back to the sideline and line up at corner, line up at receiver the next play. So, of course it stinks. And most players made it back. I'm trying to, either at the event on Friday or at the game on Saturday, a lot of guys, I'd say, 18 to 22 of the starters, or 18 to 25 starters on both sides of the ball made it back. And this is what's really cool, is it was the trainers, it was the video guys, it was the coaches. And I think that's the one thing for me that was also so cool, because, D'Antonio at the 10-year was coaching at Michigan State, so couldn't come. So to be able to sit with Coach D'Antonio and talk about, of course, him and I got into scheme, got into the Knoll scheme, got into actually the high school my son goes to, we run a scheme similar to what he did at Michigan State, and he knows the coordinator there. So we were talking ball. Mark Snyder, who also head coach at Marshall. He's been at A&M. He's been at Florida State. He's been a lot of places. And a text here and there keeps the connection alive. But until you sit down and, you break bread, you have a beer and you talk about life again, that was really exciting for me.
Yeah, that was cool, man. I mean, wow, what a cool event. And, and I always remind people, there's a lot of guys who spilled blood for Ohio State on that stadium floor, in one form or fashion, literally and figuratively. But you being part of a special group, a 14-0 group, first team to ever go 14-0 in major college football, and to get it done the way y'all got it done. I mean,
and I just think
there's something different about that in the 2001 team, right? You see what I'm saying?
Right. Well, not only that, but what makes sense, I was thinking about it even last night, knowing that I was going to join you and then maybe just talk about it, with friends and family over the next couple of weeks, is what makes that team also so unique is when you go through, say, the 25 starters, right, and certain personnels, 80% of those guys are John Cooper recruits.
Yes.
But yet, and you got Kenny Peterson, you got Donnie Nicky, you got Andy Green, you get these red shirt senior guys, you get Mike Dostang for his fourth year.
Yes.
You've got me, kind of getting injured in the spring and being at my best for that senior season. So Krenzel had to take some lumps before he becomes a starter. So a lot of guys, like, we almost needed a 7-5 season. Because having Tressel come in and having this immediate success, the way that Urban has done it. You even saw Brian Kelly took a lump last night in a close one against Florida State. It almost it didn't come so easy to us. But then again, I think also we talked about the land grant event. It's Coach Tressel put the emphasis on the game again, which made it very different. Which also started the steamroll of what has become the last 20 years of Ohio State Michigan rivalry, which is 18 victories, a tie, and a loss, or something of that sort. I don't rattle it off that quick. But
lost in 2003 and 2011. That's it.
Correct. Yeah. So there's a lot.
In last year. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of changes that happen because of the coaching change, and then because of the success of the 2002 team. I'm sure if you went to the next, say, 4 recruiting class and said, how much did winning that national championship and Coach Tressel delivering a bunch of guys to the NFL, win a national championship, increase grade point average and graduation rate significantly from one coach to the next, have a play in you coming to Ohio State.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of guys would just nod their head, and it was huge, which changed the landscape at Ohio State to be competing for a national championship year in, year out.
Yeah. You know what? And too, Matt, and Coach Tressel's always been pretty humble about talking about things about that, about a lot of things, but especially that season. But I had him on my podcast last week, and finally he's kind of breaking through with the idea, embracing the idea that, that was, you guys were the snowball that started rolling downhill for this program again. And the last 20 years have been crazy. I mean, crazy success, 2 national championships along the way. Who should have won more? Well, you know what?
Yeah.
Between 68 and 2002, talk to me. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't come easy. They don't come cheap. And to see the magic develop, I
think lastly, the one thing that's great to kind of move on was just how many traditions, and because now it's like you've had Urban after Tressel. I'll say, I don't even call Fickle really. Fickle was pushed into that one season, but then Urban comes in and Ryan Day comes in, and how many traditions that started with Coach Tressel and that winning atmosphere that we created in 2002, that every coach brings their own twist. Urban does things, with what do they call it?
Real life Wednesdays, things like that. Yeah. Oh,
Real life Wednesdays.
The quick cows.
With Schlags and stuff. Yeah, quick cows. Ryan Day does it a little bit different, but acknowledging the alumni and the best damn band in the land after every win or loss, and running over and singing, and having the entire stadium sing, and the walk from the Blackwell to St. John's, to Skull Session, and then that walk back into the stadium are all traditions that will probably now last 50 to another 100 years of Ohio State football because of Jim Tressel and what we helped start and accomplish in 2002.
Yeah, and now everything's got a sponsor. including the players. That would be another 4-hour conversation. I want to get into that. All right, let's get into it, man. You and I were talking during the season last year. You were almost watching games like this. I got my hands over my eyes for you folks listening on the podcast basis, but on YouTube you can see this. But the bottom line is, to January, obviously in December, Ryan Day made the switch, hired Jim Knowles. Obviously, Jim Knowles didn't take over till after the bowl game, the Rose Bowl. Oh my gosh, what a game, right? And we talked about that in the spring. We were all curious about what this defense, this new 4-2-5 defense with the little nuances in it, the 3 safeties, the floating defensive lineman, was going to look like, and how effective it was going to be in real life, not the spring game. So here we are. One game in the belt. Notre Dame scores 10 points, is shut out in the second half. I'm just giving the basics here. To me, I don't care what defense you're playing. That's a pretty damn good night, And
absolutely.
So just Matt Wilhelm, what was your take seeing this on Broadway and not in Peoria? What was your take on this defense?
I think three words pop into my brain. In that stadium, watching that defense, because again, it was a major topic, because we almost know what to expect from CJ Stroud in that offense, and Ryan Day as a play caller, and Hartline and those receivers, right?
Yeah.
It was a huge question mark, and even in some intimate text messages with some of my guys there in Columbus, it was all this talk about top 10 defense, and I'm like, well, hell, just be a top 50 defense and have that offense be as good, and we're going to be a really good spot, But I think I'd say physical, I think aggressive, and I think exotic. The physicality I thought was not present last year. I do think that at times that the aggressive aspect of defense was almost forced by that staff when you didn't have players. I think the players they weren't completely bought in. I don't think you had the horses to be able to get overly aggressive, because you really never got home. And then I think you finally have these guys that are bought in, and in some cases it took running a very similar scheme, D'Antonio to come in and Mel Tucker to come in and Mark Snyder to come in 2002 or in 2001 with a change from Puckett, your defensive coordinator, and John Cooper and his staff, and have these guys go like, this is the way we're gonna do it, and this is what's expected. And I think that these guys, as good as they played, there's a lot of pressure for them. They heard all the noise. They heard all the talk. I'm sure Jim Knowles probably didn't give a what about it, because he's fresh and brand new to Columbus, so he doesn't know where to listen to. He just goes, this is what I'm going to do. This is what they're paying me to accomplish. But I think, and then lastly, the exotic aspect is we probably got so used to them lining up and looking the same way with the same guys doing the same things. And now Jim Knowles is going to have, 3 defensive linemen. When's the last time the only time we saw 3 defensive linemen was in like a prevent, when we're up 2 touchdowns and we're trying not to give up a 2-minute touchdown. But I loved it. I think it wasn't overly complicated, but it was just full of physicality and aggressiveness. And then, and I'm sure you have, and when you really dig into stats, and this is what I do to kind of legitimize my thoughts and feelings about it, you take away that 54-yard pass on the first play of the game, and you take away the magical, bobble catch, which is 30, 32, 34 on his back. Okay, that's 85 yards. I think they had 275 for the game. So you give up, and I know you can't take them away, but in theory, you take those fluky plays away. They have under 200 yards, probably under 70 yards in the second half. Don't score in the second half. They rushing the ball. And I'll tell you what, at times, and I think, being in the stands, the overall feeling amongst, even the 2002 guys or even in fans in general, as you touch base about the flow of the game, it was like, it's like tough sledding because the offense wasn't as efficient as we remember them from the Rose Bowl. It was tough to get yards. Notre Dame's got a good front, and we weren't running the ball the way that we're so used to. And Stroud and his receivers without Njigba, who unfortunately had that injury, they weren't as efficient as we remember. It kind of carried over to the defense. You go, man, in the defense, it just seems like Notre Dame's just moving the ball. But then when you dig into the stats, you go back through the game flow. It's like no one was really doing. It was a real feeling each other out second half or first half. And this is where I think I would have thought that Notre Dame, with their esteemed coaches, would have been able to match what Ohio State does. But since I was there as a player, and Tim, you've been covering them for a long time. How many times would Akron or Toledo or some, inferior opponent kind of play us tough for a first half early in a season, right?
Yes.
And so say it's 14-7, we're up at halftime, but like everybody expected to be 28-7.
Yeah.
And you're a little bit like, oh gosh, are these guys good? What are they going to do? But then you go in and the coaches have the time to breathe, to convey how they're trying to attack us, what we're going to do to counter their attack, and on hindsight. And then all of a sudden, it's like a tale of 2 halves. We come out and execute. We maximize, we make one little, it can be the difference between a guy being in a 2-eye or a 3 technique and getting into a 2-eye and playing through the guard's face instead of playing through the guard's outside shoulder. And you take away their zone read, right?
Yeah.
It's little things like that. And I think that was the biggest change of Knowles and his staff, figuring out and understanding what Notre Dame was trying to do, and I didn't really realize this when you're actually watching the game, but you hear Coach Day's comments and some of the other folks' comments, and maybe even yourself. It's like, I didn't even realize that Notre Dame was just trying to keep our offense off the field by trying to bleed and drip on us, defensively. And they had a good shot, and that's why it was so close in the first half. But then it was just a matter of time for our offense to hit, our offensive line to understand and get our hands on their front and be able to run the football. And we all know if we can run the football, what Stroud can do with the football in his hands in the passing game with our talent at wide receiver, it was going to be a night. But as I talked about earlier, I thought, Tommy Eichenberg, who was named a captain, who's wearing my number, I thought he was a shining star defensively. I think Steel Chambers is still, Steel Chambers at linebacker. I think the ability for our corners, Denzel Burke, to just wipe those. And I don't think Notre Dame's all that talented on the outside, other than those couple of fluky catches. I think they had, looking at the stats, it was those 2 that we talked about and one other 31-yard. It was just, they tried to force the ball to Baby Gronk, the Michael Mayer kid, way too often. But he's an NFL level talent, but they tried to force him the football. He's got, I guarantee he had double-digit targets and only had 5 receptions for 50 yards. So that means for 30 yards, our linebackers had him under control. Our safeties were able to run with him and man him up in certain situations. So, all in all, a great performance. And this is the caveat associated with all of this for Buckeye fans is a lot of pressure, is all you've been called out on what you couldn't do in 2021. You've got a new defensive coordinator. You've got to execute for him. You've got to execute your job. You're playing a top 5 opponent at home. And really, like, I don't think we're going to even see how good this defense is going to be until we probably get out of these first 5 home games. And I know a couple of them are big against Wisconsin. They're going to be a challenge to stop it. But like by like week 6, week 7, week 8 is really when these guys should be firing, because personnel have been figured out. Jim Knowles in live game situations will know everyone's strengths and everyone's weaknesses, and they will play, of course, to each other's strengths. And then, frankly, I talked about this tonight. It may be, even if they're going to be great, even if we go compete for the Big Ten, win a national championship this year, I mean, Jim Knowles hasn't recruited one player on this football field yet.
Right.
And so when he goes out, he goes into houses and he recruits the body styles and the body makeup of a 3-tech or a specific linebacker or a corner. It's going to be, great success. And I think the one thing that I would say, just because you can't just go, oh, everything was great. The one thing that I wish I would have saw more of, because we have 5-star elite talent added, is they made some plays, but I think our edge rushers didn't win the way that we are so used to seeing our edge rushers win at Ohio State, meaning the Bosas and Chase Young and, on the edge. I think, JTT and Jack Sawyer were physical and they were aggressive, and they hit the quarterback a lot. They just never got there.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that I think, as we see, there may be some pre-snap look stuff, and, they may have to tweak some of their the way in which they tech. And I mean, and again, Notre Dame's strength is their offensive line.
Yeah.
So good for them. But Notre, the offensive line doesn't score touchdowns. So I would just like to see, those playmakers, that we expect to be elite in the defense. Just, and I'm sure there's some patience associated with really deliver for us.
But I tell you what, they were keeping in mind this Tyler Buckner kid making his first start. He was, decent passer, but he was known also to be able to run. And I can understand being a little bit, instructing these guys to be a little bit tentative. Don't let him break contain. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I mean, play that way. But boy, what I really liked was where they sprinkled in these things like the slight delay blitz by the Matt Wilhelm number wearing Tommy Eichenberg just came clean and popped the quarterback one time. And even on the first play, JT Tuimoloau was right in the kid's face.
Yes, he was.
Threw that ball. And so you saw some things there. And then the other thing, which, people listen to me a lot, know I harp on this on radio and whatever. There is nothing like pressure up the A gaps. And Mike Hall, take a bow, Mike Hall, because that number 51, that kid had a game. And, of course, he has the sack on figuratively the last play that really mattered in that game defensively. But I thought he was a presence all night. You got to like that, right, from a defensive standpoint of just getting that push inside.
Absolutely. And I think that makes life easier on Eichenberg and those linebackers when you have a guy, dominant, especially because we're in that, Jim Knowles, like 3-man front with that jack stand-up position doesn't quite look like we're so accustomed to seeing, which is, kind of a strong side defensive tackle on a weak side. He's lined up in the middle, and just his ability to put that pressure up the middle is fantastic. It will only loosen things up. And I think as you dig into the schedule and we, now celebrate this win and we have all of our takes and to be able to study what happened in the Notre Dame game, I think a great blessing that our schedule works having 2 significantly inferior opponents in the next 2 weeks, which will allow, and I hate to say this, and I'm not trying to knock either Arkansas State or Toledo, but it's just going to be the matter of fact. We're the number 2 team in the country. We recruit against the top 5 teams in this country. So we have better talent. We have better coaches. Jim Knowles in this defense will be able to tinker with concepts. Tinker with pre-snap looks, based around what he saw in Notre Dame, based on because then you have to do some self-scouting. Well, okay, when Notre Dame was having a little bit of success, why were they having some success? How were they attacking us? And then what you do from week to week is not only do you get your players better, but then you get your scheme, you tweak your scheme and go, okay, we can give a pre-snap look to have, I'll say Hall in a 2-eye and then have him shift over to a 1, right before the snap of the ball. So they can't attack. There is no bubble for them to attack. Yeah. Or a backer, bows over or bosses over to strength,
By the way, late in the game, they did that with Hall one play. They brought him from the center's right to the center, literally just off the center's left shoulder. And boy, what a play that was. I mean, he ends up Buckner scrambled and Hall just took that angle right across the center's face and made the play. And it was like, wow, that you know what I mean? Those are the things that kind of get you revved, because it's just a snippet of what you might be seeing coming. Go ahead.
It absolutely is, and I think to your point, the one thing I saw even on the Eichenberg sack, yes, it was like a little bit of a delayed blitz, or we might have had the backing coverage. Yep. We used to call it like a green dog, but it took a little bit of a slant by the offensive line to create that space for Eichenberg to fit. And I swear to you, you go back to like that's like a slant defense is like a CYO Pop Warner football level of, we're going to line up here, we're going to get moving, but that is so black and white compared to what we saw last year. It was, we just lined up and we expected to win that one-on-one matchup time over time. And because we didn't quite have the talent and the scheme, our guys just got blocked. Yeah. Or it was an amazing individual effort is how it took to make the plays, where, gosh, in the defense that I played in and the great defenses that, Trestle's had in years past, and even Urban, it's a combination of scheme and player to create a silver bullet defense to put you in a great situation to make plays. So those little intricacies, but again, go back, they will watch this. They will be critical. I think you'll see, of course, some younger guys get an opportunity in certain situations, or, guys will be, some of the starters will be shifted around here and there in the next couple of weeks. So I'd say Buckeye fans should not go like, what's going on? Why are we doing this? There's a method to the madness, because we are still figuring things out. Jim Knowles only knows so much about these guys from what he's seen in practice and what he knows about them in meeting, or even watching last year's tape. They've played one game. You've got two, I'd say this, rehearsal type games to get better before Big Ten play starts. Yeah, and you're right, man, on that play you're talking about with because I'm just going to bring it up because I just love this kind of stuff about football. I always tell people, watch the game from the inside out, because that's what determines what's going to happen. And they had a defensive tackle flash right across the center's face there from the center's right to left, and it ended up a double team block with the center and the left guard, and Eichenberg just flashed right because the right guard was involved with somebody else, and they had to go. Yeah, they had a fan to the end. They had a fan to the jack backer. So the guard fans, the tackle fans, and it creates that little loop. Yeah, Eichenberg ran tight, and sure as heck, just like you practice it, the quarterback standing right there. Yeah. Hey, last thing. Yes, sir. Because I'm gonna get you a few times this year, man. Because I totally appreciate your analysis. We all got caught up in this. Even Vegas got caught up in this. This Ohio State offense is going to continue to rock and roll. The over/under at one point last week was 59. I think it may have dropped to 56 the last day. And I'm not getting into the into the gambling aspect of it. Ohio State was a 17-point favorite, then a 16. Ends up winning by 11. But I wanted to just ask you this: what does it do? What does it do for a football team where throughout the offseason, Ryan Day was the two words he kept preaching, and you touched on this a minute ago, was competitive stamina, which, when you translate that, means fourth quarter, boom, be going like you were in the first quarter, have that ability to keep guys fresh, whatever. And what does it do for a team when you dominate the last 20 minutes of a game with a top 5 opponent? Granted, it was in your stadium, but you were trailing until you get that touchdown drive, and Xavier Johnson, of all people, with these guys on the bench with Jackson Smith and Jigba sidelined, and Julian Fleming not being able to answer the bell for the first game, they went deep into that receiver room, and Xavier Johnson, a former walk-on, catches the go-ahead touchdown. What I'm getting to here is, but physically, that 95-yard drive coming off their goal line. Yeah. But Travion Henderson gets it started. C.J. Stroud keeps it going with a couple of really nice pass plays, including a comebacker to Mayan Williams on the sideline. Yeah, he'd run a wheel, but he was smart enough to come back to the sideline. He actually had the wheel. And Stroud had the wheel early. Yes, he did, but he had to lob it over. But he had to bail out. Because Stroud didn't give it to him. He bailed out, which is great. But Mayan came running back instead of going, "Hey, hit me deep." But then Mayan Williams just all they could handle, man. What does that do for a football team that was told it was soft, not physical?
couldn't finish in the two biggest games it played last year. What does that do for a team going forward?
I think it edifies the message, because a coach can say this team is blank. This team is aggressive. This team's going to be aggressive. We need to be aggressive. But then when you actually go out and do it, it does give you a little bit of confidence that you're able to execute on your coach's words. But I know, going back and speaking out of personal experience about 2002, how many of those games for us were decided in the fourth quarter, right?
It was stupid.
Illinois, Purdue, Michigan, and
Miami.
And you point to when, off-season summer conditioning and spring ball and mat drills, when you push your body harder than you've ever pushed it before, so that when you get in the game almost comes easy to you. So it's like you've taken the torture all off season long to prepare for the opportunity to be in the fourth quarter. And I think lastly, and I'm sure the big schools in the country, the Clemsons, the Bamas, Ohio State in general, we get so used to cruising and playing 35-14 and getting the twos and some of the threes in, and we're breaking red shirts because the games are such a blowout that we take for granted. And I know it's stressful to our fan base, but that's not real football. Yeah. Real football is, again, if you look at the NFL, there's an immense amount of parity in the National Football League. Yeah. And all the games are decided by, 70% of them are decided by 4 points or less. Yeah. What Buckeye fans would have aneurysms if every game was, down to the fourth quarter. They love the blowout. We get so used to the blowout. And even my son's team at high school level, it's like, oh my God, like we blow up, we won 42-8 the first week, and the next game was a close one. They're like, oh my God, that was so stressful. I go, this is football. It's not supposed to be a blowout. Yeah. And I think so to have the horses in the stable, like we do from a talent standpoint, that do not shy away from stepping up in big moments to make that play, whether it's offensively or defensively. And then what Mickey Marotti and that staff has done to have these boys at their best mentally and physically, to not shy away from making those plays and being physically strong and physically in condition to make those plays as well. Because for us, and I think this was so great about this team is, you had to get some stops in the second half. You had to give the ball back to your great offense, and you knew they were just going to make a play. It was very odd for us in 2002, and I mean, Mike Doss talked about it this past weekend for the Holy Buckeye play in Purdue. It's like the defense wanted the pressure of being able to have to make the stop or make the play or get the pick or force the fumble or get the sack and force the punt to give the ball back to the offense. Yeah. But in that situation, we kind of did, but the game kind of hung in limbo on, we win this game only if our offense can go down and score a touchdown. Yeah. It was very odd for us. But when you play at the level that an Ohio State football team plays, it's expected. It's expected for you. And I think it's why you see great players making memorable plays in these crunch spots in sports, in spots in a game like Ohio State that you can point back to that play. Like, for example, if I had $1 for every time, I'd have $100 for every time I said, dude, that hit on Dorsey in the 2002 national championship when you came on that blitz, and it's like, when you come free as a linebacker, unabated as a quarterback, you want to make him pay. And I did my best to make him pay. Did I get a sack? No. But everyone just goes, he was never the same after that. No, he wasn't. So it's your ability to execute a blitz in that moment, make that play that has a long-lasting effect on the football game and potentially the outcome. And
it has a long-lasting effect on you to execute at the moment you've got to execute. There was a former coach at Ohio State, Gary Blackney, who made a good point one time. And he was talking to me and Bruce Hooley, just shooting the bull in the hall one day there at I call it the old Woody Hayes Athletics Center, but it used to look. And he said, our job is not to get a player in position to make the play. Our job is to coach him up, to get him in position, and then make the play. And if you can do that, with superior personnel, you got something going. And I thought we saw that the other night in that stadium. Mike Hall would not be denied a few times. You know what I mean? Right, right on down the line. I mean, you're going to give up some plays in modern college football because Notre Dame has some really, really good players.
And you don't go to Ohio State just to be a guy.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes tackles. You go to Ohio State to be the dude. Yeah. Like Mike Hall Mike Hall, and Tommy Eichenberg, and Xavier Johnson and Gukba, like they come to Ohio State to do what they did and to have this effect on the perception of Ohio State football after a win like Notre Dame.
Yes,
they want their names to be talked about. Again, you get nil money because of it. You get you may be on an NFL radar now because of it. You now, in the eyes of your coaches, get more opportunities as opposed to them keeping you in like Xavier Johnson, for example, was probably in a box of where Hartline and Coach Day, in an ideal situation, would have him integrated into a football game.
Yes.
Right. When this situation happens, this is when we'll kind of get Xavier more acclimated and call on him to make a play. Not on 3rd and 11, inside the red zone
against the number 5 team in the country. Yeah.
Yes, but I mean, and I still can't believe after a timeout that Notre Dame brought that double safety blitz against a quarterback like Stroud. I mean, it's the dumbest thing in the world.
Yeah.
I saw it from a million miles away because I was in 15A, so it was like right there in front of me. And I go, the second I saw those twos walk down and then hit it on the snap of the ball, I go, it's like we're gonna go for. It's like this ball's getting thrown into the end zone.
Did CJ Stroud have a superior statistical game? No. Did he have a game? I mean, that throw to Mayan Williams on the left side of it, we talked about earlier, that quick read and this former walk-on receiver who's hardly played at all at receiver reads the same thing and makes the play. That's what sets you apart, man.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think as much as you want to, as much as Coach Day and Stroud put together a plan to spread the football around, there were probably 4 plays with specific alignments for Jackson Smith and Jigba to basically force him expect and kind of knowing in certain situations what defense we would get from Notre Dame, that he was 100% with certainty getting the football.
Yeah.
And when you have that situation happen where he gets hurt, well, then what?
Yeah.
Now, and you have the players, and you have the horses that can make the plays.
Gotcha.
So it's awesome.
And Matt Wilhelm, I'll finish your thoughts you had a minute ago. When you're making these plays and good things happen and you keep making these plays, eventually you might be on a team that might have a big reunion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, again, they have the table's been set. I mean, looking around college football, Ohio State beats a number 5 opponent in the country. I think Notre Dame, even from what's that gentleman's name from the SEC, Feinbaum?
Yeah.
Wasn't the biggest fan about Notre Dame being number 5 and thought it was going to be a blowout. So they played us a little bit close to the vest, but I think we kind of shot ourselves in the foot on multiple occasions with our offensive efficiency and just kind of getting acclimated defensively. But yeah, I mean, Georgia looks really good, against a not so good Oregon team that we lost to last year. No, Bama's Bama, USC was USC, but we'll see. I think the best take coming out of this is, hey, a win is a win. You had an amazing setting for recruiting. You with the energy in the stadium, the rain held off. You've got deep in the offensive receiver room, and I think that defensively, these next 2 weeks give Jim Knowles like a spring ball-esque feel to tinkering with his scheme, tinkering with guys in different spots, maybe getting other guys more opportunities because. Anyway, once you overcome that early hurdle, Big Ten play is really when it matters because if you don't win the Big Ten, you don't go to the Big Ten championship game, you have 0 shot, and we found that out last year, of playing in the college football playoff.
Right. Matt Wilhelm, thanks for joining the Tim May podcast again, my man. We're going to do it a few times this year, brother, if you're up to it.
I love it.
I love the way you break stuff down and then build it back up.
Yeah.
But ladies and gentlemen, Matt Wilhelm. Thanks, Matt.
You got it, guys. Go Bucks.
Boy, I always thank Matt Wilhelm for joining the Tim May podcast. And it's really funny. In the midst of that, Spence, he brought up what you brought up when we were doing that breakdown late Saturday night in the shoe of the game, that video breakdown, that you take away 2 plays from that game, and you can't take them away, but you take away 2 plays from that game, and that was about as nice a debut for a new defensive system and a new defensive coordinator in Jim Knowles. And, of course, 2 of the other 3 coaches are brand new, in Perry Eliano and Tim Walton, basically the guys who coached the secondary. That's about as nice a debut as you could have, right?
Yeah, Tim. And, one thing that I want to point out about this defense is Notre Dame had 10 drives. 9 of them ended in 6 plays or fewer. One of those ended up in a field goal, but one of those plays on that field goal drive was the long 54-yard completion on the first play of the game.
Yeah.
So 9 of the 10 drives Notre Dame had ended in 6 plays or fewer, meaning Ohio State's defense simply is getting off the field. It's not always a 3 and out. I think a couple of those first downs, even on the other drives that were 6 plays, came on penalty. Yes. And so you had 4 3 and outs. You had 2 drives of 5 plays, or 3 drives of 5 plays, and you had 2 drives of 6 plays. That is, and I don't want to be hyperbolic, but that is incredibly difficult to do in today's college football, where every rule is geared toward offense, where everything is geared toward how many points can the team score. For Ohio State's defense to completely stymie, Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator, and Marcus Freeman's in offense, and Tyler Buckner, who was lights out in the first half, what they did,
they have what you call a drive sustaining tight end in Michael Mayer, and they couldn't do it even with him. I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, and to do what they did against this offense is very, very impressive. And I don't think Notre Dame's going to have a top 10 offense, top 20 offense in the country this year. I think they'll be methodical and slow about what they do.
Yeah.
Especially with the lack of talent at not talent, but lack of weapons at wide receiver out wide.
Yeah.
But
depth.
In any term, it is impressive, the debut that this defense had.
Yeah. And just give me your take. What is that one guy defensively? Don't name 10. You know what I mean? Remember, I was asking you for your player of the game before the game last week. Give me that one guy that, wow, boy, yes, he either verified something or he really stepped up in your mind on that defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, Tim, I think it's difficult to go with one.
No, name one guy. Don't go name 5. Name one guy.
And it's a guy that's not getting talked about a whole lot because he had 1 tackle on the night. He had 1 tackle for loss, but nothing really on the stat sheet that jumps out to you. But gosh, when you watch the game, he was just dominant. And it's JT Tuimoloau. I mean, this guy has every bit of bend that you want from the defensive end. He's every bit as powerful as you would like to see from your defensive end. He wreaks havoc. He makes plays so others can make plays. He's not in on the play, but he's demanding a tackle come off and scrape off to him and block him so that linebacker can fill the hole and make a play. He's disruptive enough to take on 2 guys and help a defensive tackle shimmy free Mike Hall and make a play. He's helping, basically block for Tommy Eichenberg to get to the quarterback on a sack. I'm not naming other guys.
Yes, you are.
JT Tuimoloau did all of that, and it was impressive to watch him. I struggled to try not using this word very often because it's just one of those things where the guy's not actually caged up. But it was impressive to see him unleashed on this Notre Dame offensive line. And gosh, he's special. And I think he's going to get to the quarterback more often than not this year. I think his stat sheet will look much more impressive next few weeks than it did on Saturday night.
Yeah. Like Matt Wilhelm and I talked about, it was a split second between him making a consummate play on the very first play of the game, getting into the quarterback's face, and that quarterback getting that pass off, that then missed tackle out on the edge by Josh Proctor, and the guy went down the field, Lorenzo Styles Jr. from Pickerington. But I'll name my guy. My guy was Mike Hall, because I think Mike Hall benefited definitely, as you pointed out, from that threat from a JT Tuimoloau and others. But Mike Hall played on a level that everybody had been whispering about through the preseason. No, some of them were talking out loud about it, but then he delivered exactly the game that you expected from him based on the hype going into the game from some of his teammates. And wow, kudos to him. The offensive guy that jumped out at you, either stepped up a notch or wow, where did he come from? I'm going to name my guy first, Xavier Johnson, to take that away from you. You wait your turn. Most people anymore don't wait their turn. After Xavier Johnson established himself as a decent member of this Ohio State football team a couple of years ago, he didn't just take that and then run off, jump in the transfer portal and find another place to play where he probably could have been a starter, maybe on either side of the ball, but definitely on the offensive side. He stuck it out. Bingo, bango, bongo. He got his chance and delivered with the go-ahead touchdown catch, 2 straight catches, and then following that up with a tackle on the ensuing kickoff deep in Notre Dame territory. Man, I've been covering this team for a long time. I don't remember anyone having quite a minute like that on both sides, or on one of the three sides, or two of the three sides of the ball. There, I finally got to it. Special teams and on the offense, but quite impressed by him. Who was your guy?
Well, Tim, I'm going to break the rule for a second because Xavier Johnson could have.
What do you mean for a second? You mean for the third week in a row? But go ahead.
Well, I want to add a little bit of context to Xavier Johnson here. You say that he could have transferred because he proved some things, and this isn't a knock on what Sam Wiglusz did going to Ohio, but I'm a Bobcat. I pay attention to the Bobcats. Saturday, I'm seeing developments left and right on, who is this Sam Wiglusz transfer from, to Ohio. This is a guy who had 5 catches for 59 yards, 2 touchdowns, and was stopped at the 1, was 1 yard shy of getting the hat trick for touchdowns. That's a former walk-on at Ohio State. So all that's to say is Xavier Johnson could have transferred anywhere in the country. And I'm not just saying anywhere that, there are only 5 or 6 programs that he probably would not have been accepted at. And he could have contributed in a wide receiver room, but he chose to stay at Ohio State. And to see it rewarded the way that it was with that go-ahead touchdown on Saturday night is incredible, because like I just said, he could have went to a MAC school, to a AAC school, and been one of the best players on the offense. Obviously, Sam Wiglusz is in a MAC program, one of the best players in that offense. Yeah. So all that's just a little aside plug for.
You know what also impressed me about Xavier Johnson? He could have been up there, the biggest head you ever saw on when we're talking to him after the game with CJ Stroud next to him there, and just the humility he showed. The eloquence he spoke with about how faith helps him endure everything and anything. And he kept going back to that. Some people are turned off by that kind of talk. Not me, because I believe these guys that play high-level college football have to have belief in themselves and in something else to go out there repeatedly, not just in practice, but in games, and deliver those kind of performances, knowing that any moment can be your last playing the game. You know what I mean? And I was just impressed by him as a human after that game. Now go ahead.
So all of that is to say that my guy that I'm going to highlight in this is not one of the sexy positions. It's not one of the guys who gets the football. It's Paris Johnson. And you rewatch the game, Tim. I know you're a guy who likes to sit down and watch the game again.
Already did that.
Focus on 77 and watch the way he handled 7 in white and gold. Because 7 in white and gold is Isaiah Foskey. That's going to be a first-round pick by a lot of people's standards in the upcoming NFL draft in the spring. And Paris Johnson, in his first career start at left tackle, had no issues with Isaiah Foskey. I think there were only 1 or 2 plays where you would even say Foskey won the rep. And most of Foskey's, hurries or whatever you want to call them came against DeJuan Jones. And that's not a knock on DeJuan Jones. He was facing one of the best defensive ends in America. Yeah. But when you put Paris Johnson against Isaiah Foskey, it was not really an even match. Paris Johnson handled himself as you would expect an All-American first-round left tackle to handle himself against an All-American defensive end. Yeah. And that is saying so much about how good he can be. Not how good he is right now, because I think he's just scratching the surface, having his first ever start at left tackle. Yeah. If he continues to get better, you're talking about a guy who I'll be willing to watch against Will Anderson in January. I'll be willing to watch against the Georgia defensive end in January. I would love to watch that. And so he's only going to continue to get better. This first start was a statement start, not for the offense in general, but for Paris Johnson at left tackle, because he was really good in the run game too.
Yeah. Are we getting too hyperbolic after opening game? After last year's opener at Minnesota, you could say that, if this was over Minnesota, this was over the number 5 team in the country. And now people are going to be talking about how, well, Notre Dame didn't quite get it done on offense. They weren't what you thought they were going to be. Well, you weren't paying attention. Number one. Number two, like I said, Las Vegas got it wrong, both in the spread and in the over-under, big time wrong. So I'm not ashamed of the fact I picked Ohio State to win somewhere like 45 to 23 in that opener. I expected both teams to be coming out firing. I think both teams' work did come out firing, but you saw 2 really good defensive teams on that field on Saturday night. And then as Ryan Day said, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid here. He is right, man. They beat the number 5 team in the country by 11 points, and they did it by basically wearing them down and then owning the last 20 minutes of that game on both sides of the ball. I think you agree with me on that, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you look at, the toughness, the physicality that was needed to get that win, under their belt. They showed it. And, you talk about a program that wanted to define itself by something other than talent. Like Ryan Day said, it's not just a bunch of 4 and 5 stars from Florida, California, Texas, and Ohio. These guys are tough. And, one thing that I did want to point out, I think the Pro Football Focus grades came out today. And take those for what they're worth. It's analytical, and they're good and fine. I use them as a resource, as part of my resource. It's not the only thing that I weigh, but I think it's just Jason Amendola, the defensive tackle from Notre Dame, who said that they were the toughest, baddest MFers, in the country. I think he had the worst run defense grade of anybody on that defensive line, and I don't think that's a knock on him because I think he's a really good player. I think that's a credit to Luke Whippler and to Matthew Jones and to, Donovan Jackson, who decided, hey, we've got something to say about that, and the toughness showed. And Ohio State, for all the heat that it took, it kicked Notre Dame's in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
But on both lines of scrimmage, it kicked Notre Dame's butt, and that's not something we could have said about this team last year at any point, let alone at the beginning of the season.
Yeah. As I wrote about, story that you probably going to drop, you probably dropped late Monday or early Tuesday on the lettermenrow.com site, competitive stamina. That's what Ryan Day pushed the entire offseason. And that is a big umbrella, takes into account conditioning, toughness, keeping your head in the game. It came to the fore. That is a win for Ryan Day, Mick Marotti, and these offensive and defensive coordinators and staff, coaching staff, to get that accomplished, because that was what was missing in those 2 big games last year. Was just they got shoved around the field and seemed to kind of lose their way from a concentration standpoint, maybe even a panic standpoint. That was not the case against Notre Dame. They were trailing deep into the third quarter against Notre Dame, took the lead, and never looked back. That's the way you want to finish. That's called competitive stamina, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, they're going to have to be able to show that all year.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we look forward to seeing you again next week. I always enjoy Spencer Holbrook joining me in that co-pilot seat. He sits up high. He's ready to talk. And Spencer, thanks for joining me again, my man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Tim. It's great to always be in the cockpit here.
And thanks to my good friend Matt Wilhelm, man, for breaking it all down for us. Few do it better than he does. So until next week, this is Tim May for Spencer Holbrook. We'll see you then.